Hello, everybody. How's everybody doing? Welcome to Philo Sapience, where religion meets reason. And with me, as always, is Mohammed, which means we are going to have an English stream. And apologies for a little bit of a delay. We were actually trying to decide as to how to structure this stream. And even after that, we, we couldn't come to a proper decision as to how we should structure. And the reason being, this is one of those topics that we have avoided touching upon, and uh, realizing and knowing that this is one of those very extremely sensitive topics that if you touch upon, and even though the title of the stream says that philosophical take of on child marriage in Islam and all those things, we weren't really sure as to what points we were going to touch upon, because this if we were to really critique something like this or take up a stance on it, then we should be ideally probably taking up all the religions across the board, and maybe at least touch upon the concept within their own religious edicts at least. So that was one of the confusions we had. I thought that we'll just touch upon Islam in particular, because that's one of the things that's very commonly brought about, and that is Prophet's marriage to Ayesha. And that's one of the things we will touch upon, but we'll just go and wade through as it comes in our mind. We'll take up a few things, few objections here and there, and then see how it goes, whether those objections are really valid or invalid, or there's a wiggle room within those objections. So all this we'll try to cover and see if there is uh, any force in the objections that everybody else or the non-Muslims call out on um, Prophet Muhammad's marriage to Aisha. So before we do that, welcome, Hadin. How are you doing? It's been a long. I think we did an English stream, right? I think last English stream was probably 3 or 4 weeks back.
Yeah, I can't remember, to be honest. I'm not sure it was. I think it may have been 2 weeks ago, but yeah, possibly, quite possibly. But yeah, yeah, like you said, this is sort of arouses a lot of religious sensitivities to talk about this topic. But there's absolutely no reason why it should, because you can approach this topic in a very. I think people do want to talk about it and discuss it, and even many many people from also across the religious divide have things in their scripture, things in their history that might be taken up and challenged, and some people want to be able to sharpen their debating skills, for example, on these matters, and be able to handle certain objections from either side, right? And so, what I think a good way to approach this topic is by actually strengthening certain arguments for the religious side, and then seeing whether they hold up. Which is how exactly philosophy should be done, right? Taking the best versions of these, not treating as a form of mockery, because we've
Yeah, yeah,
seen
totally.
we've seen a lot of people, mock or deride or dehumanize people based on these things, and it's understandable that it will emotionally hurt others. They don't want their religious figures to be mocked. So we're not going to do any of that on this. We're just going to take an intellectual approach and look
Right.
at the arguments and weigh them properly in the fairest way possible, as far as we can do. So it's a human effort to try and understand this. And hopefully, if there's any, our main preoccupation might be the Islamic one, the Islamic religion, simply because that's the one that we know the most, one we have the most background of, right, and so on. So we're going to talk about that primarily, but it doesn't have to be restricted to that. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And one more thing, Martin, I wanted to clarify here, that and from the very onset of this discussion, is that uh, there are certain ways in which we can, even if if we go deep down that route of discussing Prophet Muhammad's marriage to Aisha, right? We can have a very different stance on it. You can say, if this was a common practice, if all the information in the Sahih Hadith and the the ages are right and everything is right. First thing first, I am a little bit skeptical of those descriptions. But let's say, for the sake of argument, even if those descriptions and the numbers and the ages and everything are right, correct. Even then, I think if this was a common practice around that time, I don't see that to be a problem. Somebody marrying, at the age of 6, right? Maybe later on, some people put some, what do you call, religious or godly edicts on top of it. And when you combine those things with, with those kind of practices, that's where I think, you start saying that, oh, okay, now it doesn't make sense, right? Because now we have a better understanding. If something, let's say, and this is just an example, let's say somebody knows what will happen in future, but and that, and that science will advance so much so that we'll start to understand how consent works. Or, well, consent has nothing to do with science, but let's say, uh, you know what is the right, let's say science has come to a consensus that right age for marriage is, let's say, 21 years, for example, right? Then in that context, in that very context of this new information, now you can say that that probably was not a very good idea, marrying 6 years old at the, if you had that knowledge, if you had that futuristic knowledge, right? Or maybe then that edict is not probably true for all times to come, right? Might be true for that time, but you can't take that edict, or you can't take that kind of tradition out of that 7th century to the 20th century or 21st century or whatever, right? So that's just wanted to clarify that point here. So Mahadan, a lot of the Muslims, and these are the points you wanted to bring about. So maybe you want to go ahead and uh, put on your skull cap.
Yeah, so ideally, I think this would have been better if we had like a presentation ready for this. Unfortunately, we didn't get the time. Although I think I may have been able to pick. I'm probably I may have been able to put one together today if I tried hard enough. But I think that's just our lack of organization, preparation a little bit there. But it doesn't really matter because it's all it's all there in our heads, I suspect. So you guys may just need to follow us here, right? So we've got a list, right? And I would ask Philo to just help me out here because I'm not looking at the list right now. But if he wants to just give me point number 1, and then we can dive into it.
Yeah. So one of the responses that we get from Muslim
So,
apologists, or
Philo, before you proceed, sorry, I apologize for. I know I just said. Before you proceed, let me just give a bit of a preamble here, right? So, what is child marriage and what are we talking about here, so that we get a better understanding, right? Of
yeah,
things.
definitely. That's one of the things I wanted to do as well. So yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah. What I just wanted to introduce, because there has to be an introduction. So, historically, child marriage, we're talking about a thing that we're kind of back projecting. Historically, it may not have been even being called child marriage. It was just marriage, right? But in every culture, in every society, in every epoch, in generation, you want to talk about the ancient Greeks, ancient Romans,
Every tribe, every
every
tribe,
tribe,
every nation, whatever you want to call it.
you had, yeah, at least to the extent of pre-modern society, maybe even more, right? You've had people getting married, and sometimes people now what we formally recognize as very young people who we consider to be children, right? Uh, and that distinction may not never have been made by many cultures in the past, right? But child marriage, that's what we mean. So a child or a children, adolescents, pre-adolescent people, and they've not fully entered what we called adulthood. And I really intentionally keep that vague simply because there's differences as to what people mean by children and what people mean by adulthood, right? In some cultures, in some societies, adulthood wasn't defined by intellect or capability or responsibility. It was defined by other aspects, right? Defined by your menstrual cycle, right? Your ability to conceive children, not your mental faculties, right? So the definition of childhood has changed and shifted, and what we consider to be children and what we consider to be adults can vary from culture to culture and society to society. So what we mean by child marriage then is intentionally vague, and we can't do enough justice to it without writing a 50,000 word dissertation. Reality is we're going to have to narrow down and make some assumptions. So forgive us for the academic sort of jump here. And we're going to assume, since we've been this stream has been famously known for tackling issues within the Islamic prism, that what we consider today to be children of a particular age, and what we consider to be today to be adults, we're going to go with that general understanding, right? In the West, in particular, and in the East now, generally that's defined by mental abilities and capabilities and ability to form informed understandings. And in addition to biological changes and developments that occur, that generally happens to be around, I would say, 14 and above, 15. Yeah, many legal systems define it a bit higher, like 17, 18, like that, right? And we'll go into that a little bit more. But the problem of what we're going to tackle here is that there's been a individual within the Islamic scriptures, the founder of Islam, who inscribed it into the practice of the scriptures, which are continued to some extent today, or debated extensively today, or defended aggressively today. And for some people, it's a matter of great embarrassment. To some other people, it's a matter of great pride. Right, and we're going to try and figure out whether or not the ethics behind it still holds true today, or whether it ever held true back in the day. Was in that context, even in the 7th century, when it was performed by Muhammad, was this a good thing? So I just want to put that introduction in there, and what we're specifically talking about is from the Islamic historical sources, from the Hadiths and the Quran, primarily. And Philo will have to pull out these things if it's possible. Is the hadiths and then the scriptural permissions for any person within the Islamic faith.
Some of the Quranic verses, maybe.
To allow marriage to people who we now consider to be minors, right?
Okay.
We today consider to be minors, children, too young, right? So hadiths, which is there is a specific story of Muhammad marrying his final wife and his youngest wife and his favorite wife, and then in addition to that, a general corpus of Quranic injunctions enabling and giving the permission for Muslims to marry children, right? So that is what we're talking about in context. But Philo, do you want to just add to that before you bring the objection?
Just wanted to add a few points to this, and this is the legal and philosophical definition of child largely began in 17th century, and John Locke, thinkers like John Locke were one of those who brought this definition. Otherwise, this, as Madan said, the definitions were really malleable. Anybody, you could have societies where a child was someone who hadn't reached an age of puberty. Maybe I think mental faculties is much more recent kind of an addition to that. But other than that, I think the children who passed the age of puberty, they were and there were, of course, there were no mechanisms to find out whether somebody can and especially women can or girls can bear children at some age or not. For them, the litmus test probably was the puberty, probably, or the start of menstrual cycles, basically, right? So those were the measures that almost every society in the nook and crannies of the earth adhered to, pretty much. So yeah, but this formal definition that I'm talking about is sprang into, and it's not just like it sprang all of a sudden. And there were debates, there were discussions between these philosophers, thinkers, and that's how it, and then they said that no, children are, those who have malleable minds, and then, they have not reached the age of whatever reason maybe, and then that's how they define children basically. So now coming back to our discussion topic, and that is the child marriage in Islam. And so one of the responses given by, and especially now here in this stream, we are, of course, we're going to get into the Quranic verses that kind of give an indication, at least purportedly they mention this marriage, and there are debates about whether the interpretations are right or wrong, or
Yeah. So
there are
let's
some
look
other
at
interpretations. Yeah.
let's yeah, but Philip, just to interject, let's look at that first, so that we kind of set the theme of what we're talking about exactly, so people know. And I think
Yeah.
most
So
we're doing it slowly, but most people already know this. But I don't want to jump too many steps ahead. Just to
yeah. So let me just bring the verse over here. Let me share my screen. Okay. So this is one of the most famous verse, and anybody who has actually, anybody who has seen our streams, Khayali and I did a Hindi Urdu stream, wherein we did talk about this specific verse, and it was in response to Mufti Yasir Nadeem al Wajidi, his take on uh, child marriage, khalwat sahiya, and all those things basically, right? So anybody who wants to see that stream, understands Hindi, Urdu, can go and pull out that stream. He or she should be able to pull it out very easily in one of our live streams, or even probably there is a video clip lying in on our channel somewhere. So here, the translation is, and this is just one of the translations, but a lot of the earlier translations, maybe pre 1950s, translations almost unanimously agree on this thing, that let me just go through this verse first, right? And it says, as for your women past the age of menstruation, in case you do not know. Okay, before we move on to that thing, this uh, this surah is about divorce basically, right? And women, or idda is basically the waiting period before remarriage, right? So as for your women past the age of menstruation, in case you do not know, their waiting period is 3 months, and those who have not menstruated as well. As for those who are pregnant, their waiting period ends with delivery, and whoever is mindful of Allah, He will make their matters easy for them, right? So, Madan and the audience, what this verse is talking about? It's talking about waiting period, the idda, right? Idda, how long has to be the idda, and why did they need idda and those times? Because they wanted to know whether, if there is a child, then whose child it is, right? So that they can bear the responsibility of raising those children, right? And so the waiting period is usually, if you have a waiting period of 3 months, then you're pretty sure that by the 3 months you'll be able to know whether uh, the woman is pregnant or not, right? So as for your women past the age of menstruation, one women who are past the age of menstruation, for them waiting period is 3 months, right? And for those who have not menstruated as well. Now here, majority of the translators have put them, those who have not yet menstruated, which is they are too young to have gone through the menstrual or have started the menstrual cycle, right? And for this category is what is objected by a majority of the opponents of Islam, right? Who think that this is a practice which is really against the, this is, this what do you call this, supports child marriage, right? So that's the argument that opponents make, right? So Martin, yeah, if you want to take it over from here.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the general understanding from this was that this is a general principle laid down, giving indicative or indication that you are capable of marrying anybody who is past this particular stage, this particular biological stage, right? Um, so um, it basically from the Quran that you kind of get the impression that it is permissible for you to marry people. There's no particular sort of minimum age requirement or anything like that. It seems to be the case that those who haven't even gone through menstruation, they've got a particular sort of rule for them to enter into marital relations. So it seems as though there's no limit to marriage. At least marriage. Let's keep it clear. Marriage meaning from the Islamic context, a union before God, an institution that requires of you of certain duties and responsibilities to your spouse under God, to be in a eventual relationship that has romantic and I think romance is actually far less in the hierarchy of things, but if eventually has allows you to procreate and have your offspring.
Procreate, I think, is a more, yeah, much
Yeah,
better this.
and build a family with, right?
Yeah,
Legally speaking, in the eyes of God, and without that, it's
right.
not a legal institution. And from this, so I wouldn't comment too much on the Quran aspect here, but I don't really want to get into the nitty gritties of this debate. One of our, I think Kylie, if he was here, he may have been able to be the more front runner in terms of able to handle the scriptural aspects. But I'm not too bothered. I know there are people out there who interpret this away, right? And I don't really want to get into the interpretive conversation, right? Right, because I'm happy to kind of go in either direction and make an assumption for those who do think that, like people like Daniel Haqiqatjou, people like Mohammed Hijab, possibly even people like Hamza Tzortzis. And Philo, you may know many other scholars or non-scholars. I mean, the people that I mentioned here are non-scholars. People, famous people of Islamic influence, who align themselves with the viewpoint that child marriage, or there is no minimum age set for marriage within Islam. That's what they believe. Not all Muslims believe this, of course. We know very many who think that there is no, this verse doesn't say this. Fine. I personally don't want to get into that debate right now, because there's so many other things I want to talk about. But on the assumption that this is what this suggests, people like Hijab and so on have said that there is no minimum age requirement for marriage. You can get married when you're 2 years old, 1 year old. You can marry pretty much what we consider to be a child. Then this is the, I would say this is the main primary
Source, basically,
source.
yeah, scriptural source, right?
Exactly.
For that interpretation. And
Yes.
Martin, there are, as you said, there are different interpretations, but those who are in favor of this interpretation, that this is talking about, marriage is allowed to anybody at any age, for any age, right? That's, so their argument is that this whole surah is talking about, as you can see here, at-talaq, right? Surah Talaq, right? So this is the surah for divorce, right? Whose divorce are you gonna be talking about? Those who are married, right? And
Yes.
then
Yeah.
when you're talking about this, and when you're talking about those, and when you come to the verse 4, and as for you women past the age of menstruation, in case you do not know, the waiting period is 3 months, right? So 3 months. And for those who have not menstruated as well. Now there you can take two different interpretations
Yeah,
over
that's right.
here.
exactly. So some people say that to that it's just women who haven't menstruated yet, right?
Yeah.
Or yeah. So they
And
are they
some
are.
say, and yeah, so let me just finish my thought here. So those, there are some who say that this is not talking about those, those who have not menstruated but are young. This is about those who have this physical condition that they haven't menstruated, and yet they are over, they are of, decent age, or maybe age past the age of, what do you call, balugat, right? And which means the age of reason, if you want to call it that way. So that's the interpretation that these guys take to, justify that this is not talking about those very young, girls. So yeah, I mean, this, you wanted to jump in, right? I think so.
Well, that's all I wanted to say. That some people do go in that direction, and they may take a more holistic approach and look at many other verses of the Quran, for example, and so on, to try and say that there's plenty of areas in Islam. It says that you have to be good to your wife, or do not force anybody into marriage, and clearly a child would be not. So they kind of take a kind of a different reverse engineered approach, where they because it says elsewhere in the Quran it's littered with, apparently littered. I don't think it is littered, but it's filled with situations where you say you can't force people into marriage, and there's no force in it, or something like that. And marriage should be about, and they kind of use loose, open-ended textual terms, open textured terms, like marriage is supposed to be about peace and dignity and all this stuff, and they kind of use that as a holistic approach to things. And I think it's a very progressive theme, bringing a progressive lens to the Quran. And they kind of then make the argument that clearly it'll be harmful to marry a child, right? It would be improper because they can't consent. They don't have that sort of understanding, and so on. And therefore, they look at the entirety of the Quran and so on, and they make the conclusion that there isn't any sort of explicit thing that says you have to marry children. And this particular verse, therefore, has to be interpreted in the light of that context. And if you interpret it in the light of that context, since it doesn't explicitly say anything about children or those too young, and there's an alternative interpretation, which is that when it says not menstruated, that it could be referring to women who are of age, who are not children, but are just haven't menstruated, right? It's probably referring to them. That's how they kind of interpret that. So they first accept the first premises that I said, which is that Islam doesn't allow harmful relations, and then use that premise to interpret this verse.
Yeah, yeah, Madan, that's correct. And so I wanted to balance it out from both the sides, and I showed you why the opponents of, mostly you can say opponents of Islam in this case, are vehemently saying that no, this does promote child marriage and all those things. But then there are reformists within Islam who take the backing of this verse that's on your screen right now, or on our screen, basically, right? And it's Surah Nisa, verse number 6, right? And what it does is it, and so this is again, this is not the traditional understanding of the, earlier classical scholars. This is much more reformist, as I said. It's more of a reformist kind of interpretation, right? So if you read it over here, test the competence of the orphans until they reach a marriageable age, right? Now read the wordings very carefully. Test the competence of the orphans until they reach a marriageable age. Then, if you feel they are capable of sound judgment, return their wealth to them, right? So, what they try to, justify over here, that the marriageable age is not until you are capable of sound judgment, right? Now, there are two problems with it. Even though these reformers do talk about this, but there are two problems with it. This is not talking about general ummah. This is not talking about general population. This is just talking about orphans, right? A specific class of people. So this is not a general ruling. This is for a very specific group of people that this ruling applies to, right? Then if you feel they are capable of sound judgment, return their wealth to them, right? So this is about talking about returning of the wealth, right? There's
Yeah.
no there's no condition on marriageable age. What is marriageable age? It doesn't talk about that. They could be married earlier, but returning of the money is only after they reach the sound judgment age, right? Or whatever, when they are capable of sound judgment. Right. So this is my critique of this those reformist Muslims who bring this verse in defense of saying that no, this child marriage is not allowed in Islam, right? So yeah, at least I wanted to put forth this idea before everybody. Do you have anything to talk about
No,
it, or shall we just
so
move on?
can you just summarize them? Can you just summarize exactly what you mean by this verse? What is it lending to? What is it suggesting for the
So,
audience?
in my opinion, no, so I gave you two different perspectives, right? Basically, one is that why those apologists bring this verse and say that those, because it's talking about some class of people, it's saying that the age of marriage is, not without sound judgment when the children reach sound judgment age, right? And what my point is that this verse doesn't apply to their. I mean, this verse cannot be taken in their defense, right? Those apologists' defense. One, because it's talking about orphans, a very specific class of people, and two, it's uh, it's talking about age of sound judgment, and then not the returning of the wealth to them, and not the age of marriage
Yeah, yeah.
as a condition
That's
for
right.
sound judgment, right?
Right, right. Not the sorry, not the sound judgment as a condition for the marriage. You mean?
Yeah,
Is that what?
sound judgment is not the condition for marriage.
Yes. Yeah,
Sound judgment is the condition to return their wealth to them.
that's correct. Yeah,
Maybe they could be married earlier at an earlier age as well.
yeah.
But see, you're married early, but
Hmm.
you'll only be given your money once you reach the age of reason, because we don't want you to waste your money. And that's written in the very next line as well.
Hmm.
So wastefully and hastily, right? So wastefully and hastily is because maybe they'll just squander away whatever their wealth is out there, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah. So that's correct. So that this verse doesn't really lend that much of a strong point if you look at it in proper context for reformists or progressivists, progressive Muslims, and so on. But obviously, they've got many other aspects that they would want to probably kind of yield to that effect, and they probably want to like refer to the fact that, and I think it becomes really weak for them here at that point because they may want to just use open-ended terms, what I said before. So anything that says something like, for example, you can't force somebody into a marriage, and there's no such thing as forced marriage, that itself can then be utilized to reread the remainder of the Quran, right? Because if it says you can't force, then that allows them to have the creative, interpretive ability to logically come to the conclusion that a 3-year-old can't consent, and it would be therefore some form of non-consensual force, or because they can't make a decision, and therefore, if a condition of marriage is that they can't be forced, then Islam doesn't permit marriage with minors, right? So I think that's what they kind of would go towards at that point. But that I think also depends on how else you're interpreting it, right? So if you have the view that it says you can't have force in marriage. Well, first of all, I don't think it says anywhere you can't have force. I mean, where do we get this from anyway? Right? If you, I don't think we have anything that clearly like outlines that. But I think even if it did, even if you have like something like you can't force somebody to marry you, that would still be consistent with whether or not you can have minor marriage, depending on whether the people of the time in the 7th century viewed that as force. Very similar to how it, where in the Quran you may get the idea that you're not allowed to kill an innocent person, right?
Right.
But then how Quran defines innocence and how Quran defines guilty is different, right? So progressivists might want to look at the word innocent, something that conveys the word innocent, as being this open-ended thing, and then therefore excise or relegate or remove certain verses, the power of certain verses, and say that the entire historical tradition got it wrong. All the previous tasfirs, all the previous scholars, all the previous secondary literature, all the jurists who got it wrong. These were just man-made interpretations of the Quran, and they got it wrong. And the progressivists today have somehow enlightened themselves and realized that the Quran says in various other verses, you can't kill innocent people, and therefore it kind of you can reinterpret the more different the verses that says, for example, you can do X, Y, Z. So you end up interpreting using the word innocence in a way to reinterpret the Quran. And some people therefore use anything that may indicate, for example, there shouldn't be any force, or there should be some dignity in marriage, or people should be ready to be married, to think that obviously a child can't be ready to be married. But it really depends how people of the time would have probably viewed these things, and this may require even anthropological and historical evidence to support. Because if people of the time, like from a completely atheistic point of view, from a secular point of view, you're not going to think that this has come through God. So I've got no compelling reason to think that the Quran was talking in such a revolutionary way, right? So straight away, you'd think, all right, if it does say, for example, can't force or harm somebody in a marriage, that doesn't give you license to think that therefore, when there's evident examples of things that could be child marriage, or because of the society at the time was engaging in such a child marriage, that it was going against it, right? The anthropological information of the time, the historical information of the time itself will shed some doubt on that conclusion. That's one way to do about it. But another way to go about it is just to look at even broader context when you look at the marriage of Muhammad to Ayesha. Do you want to start looking into that now, very quickly?
Sure. What I was thinking, let's see. And where does that come from? Let me see. Where is it coming from? I think it's mentioned in a lot of hadith. A lot of, at least I remember there are at least 6 sahih hadith on that, right? And those are coming from Sahih Muslim and Sahih Bukhari, right? 2 of the most prominent, hadith books, basically, right? I mean, just next to, you can say, the Quran, right? So, what verses are those? I may have to dig into those. If you give me just 1 minute, something that I hadn't prepared for. So let me see. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do a Google. So I think we're talking about the age, right? And we're trying to gauge the age of marriage for both Prophet Muhammad and Ayesha, right? So that's one of the things. Those are the ahadith that I'm talking about, right? And at least they are, from my memory, at least they are 6 in number, but they're probably more than that, right? So at least it occurs to me that I remember seeing 6 or more, something like that. And those only in Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, right? And okay, I think I found one. And while we look at this one, I think I'm gonna try and find other ones as well, or maybe even just this one is uh, good enough for now, right? And as you can see, it comes from the the most one of the most authentic hadith books, that is Bukhari. So it says that Prophet married her when she was 6 years old, and he consummated his marriage when she was 9 years old. Sham said, "I have been informed that Ayesha remained with the Prophet for 9 years till his death." Right. So nine plus 9, 18. When in 632, uh, upon the on the or about the time of Prophet Muhammad's demise, she was about 18, which means that her marriage would have occurred somewhere around what you can say 614. No, Martin, what's
Sorry,
wrong
go
with
on.
my numbering?
I think this is fine. Don't worry about it. I don't think we should. I think we shouldn't be hyper focused on the fact that we don't have the exact hadiths that we need. But I think this is also fine.
Yeah, yeah, this is good. This is good. Yeah, yeah, go ahead. No, no, I'm just saying my mathematics just somehow just crumbled.
Yeah, yeah. So I just want to lay the groundwork really, because I don't really want to get involved talking too much. I don't want this to be a scriptural debate per se, because I want to focus on the
No,
philosophy.
this was just a recollection of something,
Yeah,
and we
yeah.
were trying to make
So
sense of it. But yeah, go
exactly.
ahead.
So
Go
when
ahead.
Kylie is around, maybe we can get into the depths of the because this is such a big discussion. We're already 40 minutes into it. I don't want to get die hard into it, but let's just for the sake of argument, just say that there are differing views on it. But I think the predominant view, the dominant historical view as well, has been that child, and in terms of, if you look at um, Islamic empires and around the world, what Muslims have allowed and permitted, child marriage was generally considered permissible, right? And people got married when they were young. Simple as that. Around the world, they did. It wasn't just restricted to the Islamic sphere; it was around everywhere.
It was
And
around the world. Yeah, yeah, it's
yeah,
yeah, totally.
yeah.
To be fair, yeah.
So, and if you're a secular person, you're an atheist, you don't think this was inspired by God anyway. It won't be too surprising if it finds itself in the Quran, or finds itself in the Hadiths, where Muhammad married a child, what we consider to be a child today, and even what they considered, apparently, when you look at this source, at least, or some other sources not that we can see here. I mean, there are sources saying, for example, that it was prohibited for yes, women to play with dolls, or people to play with dolls, unless you're children. And she plays with dolls, and she's got her dolls, and that's one way to make the inference that she was actually very young. She was considered a child for that time, right? So it wasn't entirely the case that they thought that that Aisha, for example, is an adult, right? She was a child. She was considered child, but child marriage was permissible, right? And this is why he was able to marry. That's one way to look at it. And the other way to look at it is that he's only setting an example for himself. It's just, well, not an example, sorry. He's setting up a rule for himself and not for others. So it doesn't give this is something that he can do, but not others, right? But there's nothing in the Quran that explicitly forbids it. It's all to do with interpretation, right? They're all interpreting things into it, and I think there's enough information to support I think the more leading point of view that's been there for the longest amount of time, which is that marrying somebody younger than age 8, 9, 6, 5, it's entirely possible. And this is why people like Daniel Haqiqatjou, like one of the commenters have said, and Hijab have defended it. And that's I think the classical view, right? So I just want to say that's the classical view. Now, can we debate the merits? I won't be able to do it now, and I don't want to, because I want this to be a philosophical set of ethical conversation about whether or not child marriage is a good thing, and how it affects how we should view it in light of Islam.
Yeah, totally. And just because you referenced this hadith, I just brought it up, but just for reference. And then maybe we can move on to a little bit more nuanced conversation about the philosophical way of thinking about it, right?
Yeah. So yeah, like look, if you look at the hadith, I used to play with dolls in the presence of the Prophet, and my friends used to play with me. When Allah's Messenger used to enter my dwelling, they used to hide themselves, but the Prophet would call them to join and play with me. The playing with the dolls and similar images is forbidden, but it was allowed. It was allowed for Ayesha at the time, as she was a little girl, not yet reached the age of puberty. So, kind of get an indication that prepubescent people were considered children, right? It doesn't solidly confirm that's what they thought, but it indicates that could be a very relevant way of categorizing adults versus non-adults, right? And it shows here that she herself narrated, and this is an authentic hadith, and there's various copies of it in various places, and there's not been doubted throughout history until the last 100 years, maybe less than that, maybe 40 years, right? Maybe less than that, until the last 40 years or so, because it wasn't an issue, not much of an issue back 1, 2, 3 centuries ago, but it is an issue now. But clearly, people didn't challenge this, and this was generally the idea that she was saying herself that playing with dolls was not permitted for adults. She was. She was not an adult.
Madan, can I interrupt you for a second here? And this is important, and because I want to be fair here. So anybody who's reading this needs to understand that what is highlighted here is not part of Sahih Bukhari, basically, right? This is a later commentary by Fatahul Bari in Fatahul Bari, and this is a 15th century commentary on Bukhari, basically, right? On this hadith, right? So they have to think, they have to understand that this is not there in the original one, right?
Yeah.
So just wanted to make sure that I want to clarify. Yeah.
Well, anybody has to do that. The progressive Muslim, the reformists has their own little sub commentary like that, right? They're doing their own kind of work. So my point is that's not been the prevailing academic view historically, as much as insofar we can use the word academic for history. And it's understand. And I'm actually more willing to. I steer in the direction of thinking that would have been a more honest, less politically correct version of it, because it wasn't politically incorrect at the time to think children could marry, right? And henceforth, this is more likely to be an accurate understanding of what was going on, right? So
agreed. I totally agree with you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think this is this sort of interpretation, which we all have to do, is more likely, I think, because the arguments are just stronger. Now, the arguments are just far more stronger that this is what that's how people understood it at the time. For me, it is a matter of seeing it through man-made creation, because ultimately I'm an atheist. I'm a secular person, and I have no compelling reason to think, unless something is genuinely divinely inspired or scripturally a scripture that came from God, why would it necessarily radically deviate from the norms of the time? I think a default good presumption to start off with is that the ethos and ethics of the time won't drastically change or be different. And given that in the 7th, 8th, 6th century, etc., people did marry children, it doesn't surprise me to find a situation where a person of the time married a child. And it doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, and that being supported by a lot of hadith or traditions, about that person, right?
Yes.
So that completely meets the standards of those times, pretty much.
Yes, exactly. So what I would be looking for to kind of falsify my default presumption to think that the history will be closer to how it was at the time is if I'm going to find something revolutionary there, it has to be strong and has to be explicit, right? Right?
Exactly.
Uh,
Hmm.
yeah. That's how you interpret history anyway. You kind of you Occam's razor. You use the simplest explanation. If you know around the 7th century XYZ practices will happen everywhere, and then something similar to that is being mentioned in another source, the default presumption should be that that's a continuity of that same practice, right? If you're going to think that there's going to be a revolutionary message, you want something stronger so it can
Yeah, unless
depart
there is
from.
an evidence to the contrary, right? Yeah,
Yeah, and it has to be much stronger. The burden of proof
much
has to be much
stronger, right?
stronger.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, totally.
So therefore, the burden of proof for progressivists is much stronger. Whereas I don't need to go and throw an explicit source showing that, you know, that Muhammad um, explicitly, or the Quran explicitly says you can marry somebody who is a child. You know, I, I don't need to do that. I can just read between the lines, and it's not a lot of reading between the lines having to be done. A lot of some of it is already explicit. Almost, it's not completely explicit, but almost there. You know, so I get the impression. So when I read this stuff, yeah, I get the impression that child marriage is permissible
Yeah,
and legal.
Madan, this argument that we have already distanced ourselves from the response that is given by Muslims, most of the apologists or the progressive Muslim, that she was not 9 but 19 or older, maybe, right? So what are their arguments for this? I mean, at least these that we showed, and there are multiple of those, right? We showed only two. So it seems like it's, the all the collective evidence and then the arguments that we have made so far point it to be more true that the the marriage was with a younger uh, child rather than somebody who was probably 19. Maybe you can still debate the age numbers, whether it was 9 or 9.5 or 8.5 or whatever years, right? I mean, at least the marriage occurred at 6, and then it was consummated at 9. That's what the hadith says, right? Whatever those numbers are, maybe off by point 0.5 here and there, but nothing like 9 or 19 probably. So at least we can say it
Yeah,
seems
I
more
think.
plausible that it is closer to maybe 9 and around, or
Yeah,
6
I
and
think the
around.
arguments are. I think the arguments more to do with the um, um, how birthdays were calculated, or something to do with the moon. I can't remember exactly, right?
Yeah, yeah, but the lunar calendar is only
Yeah.
gonna make it even, the age is gonna be even younger, right? Let's say
Mm.
if you calculated lunar months to be, or lunar years, to 9 lunar years are probably 8 point something solar years, right? So those numbers even drop down, and that was the practice of that time.
I
Every
think.
Almost every culture was using lunar calendars, right?
Yeah, I think even Muslims, most traditional Muslims, most Muslims, even denounce that narrative that she was much older. I think it's very popular today, though it's growing in its sentiment. But I think that was it the Yaqeen institution that
Mhm.
wrote a paper on it as well. I mean, we can just use that to debunk that point that she was much older. Do you want to have a? I think it's the Yaqeen Institute. Um, and I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
I
I
think
mean,
John,
you don't have to look beyond.
what's his
You
name,
don't have to
Jonathan
look.
Brown, Professor Jonathan Brown, who's a Muslim as well. He himself also. So he himself also says that the argument for the idea that Aisha wasn't 9, or the hadiths are weak, or some people go to the extent of denouncing all hadiths as a result of that. I think as a
Yeah,
result of the
yeah.
fact that the hadiths, they view the hadiths to be far more incriminating than
Yeah,
anything
yeah,
that the Quran.
totally, totally. I mean, this puts them in a very tricky situation. What do you call the catch-22 in a sense, right? Because if they start questioning the most authentic of their hadiths, then it puts a question on the whole authenticity of the whole Islamic narrative itself, right? Because where
Yeah.
do you get the whole narrative from? You get it from the Sahih Hadith, pretty much, or the corpus of Hadith literature, right? And if you start denying those and start cherry picking on those, then how do you come to the conclusion which ones you are picking are the correct ones or the Sahih ones, basically? I mean, even Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, You just can't. Those are sahih by default. That's why they are this, what do you call, the most sahih uh, among the sahih collection, right? That is the Bukhari and Muslim, right? So once you start doing that, then you just get your
Yeah, when you go down
yeah,
that path, but I think that it is actually quite motivated by these things because the Islamic hadiths are far more precedential. Precedential meaning they're precedents, and therefore specific examples of how things should be. Is, by the way, we can hear your background noise. If you want to just minimize cancel out that sound if you can. I don't know, but
yeah. I don't know from where this noises start to come out, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my different. Can you hold on for a minute? Yeah, you can go ahead and I'll
yeah,
change my
yeah.
microphone.
A lot of the hadiths are far more specific, right? You can find Muhammad and his companions engaging in very particular specific things versus the broad kind of more broad elastic language that you might find in the Quran, comparatively, relatively speaking. Yeah, I mean, the Quran is nowhere near as poetic as the Bible, but um, um, compared to the hadiths, it is, and you can find more specific examples. And this can be a horror show for some Muslims, what they perceive as a horror show, because they don't like the fact that, let's say, there's examples of admonishing your wife or hitting somebody or punishing a slave in a particular way or consummating a marriage with a child, right? So they want to deny the hadiths, but I don't want this conversation to turn into a conversation about Quranists versus Hadith, non-Quranists or something
Yeah,
like that.
yeah. I'm back, and can you hear the background noise now?
You've not been on long enough for me to assess that yet, but I can't yet.
Uh,
Not yet, I can't. Yeah,
okay. All right. And can you hear me fine?
I can hear you fine. Yes.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. I think
Well,
there's
yeah,
some issue.
some of the points that people do make about denying the hadiths, regarding that was recorded 200 years after the events or something like that, or that was recorded by man and the Quran was revealed by God. These things fall apart, like for obvious reasons, right? Because technically the Quran wasn't recorded by God either; it was recorded by man, just in the same way, right?
Yeah, exactly. And yeah.
Go on, no, go on, carry on.
No, and I'm saying that there is a, at least traditionally, there is there is a chain of narration for a lot of the hadith literature, basically, right? But there is no such chain of narration for Quranic verses or Quran as such, right? So that this I think we can't go into that debate as of now, because this is gonna steer our conversation into another direction. But let's come back to our main discussion. And I think how we structured this conversation was, or this discussion was around Prophet's marriage to Aisha, right? And so the second response is that the hadith is bad. I think we already discussed that, right? Maybe we will
Why
come
is it
back
bad?
to it if
Why
need
would it
be.
be bad? Why is the
Hmm?
hadith bad? Why would the hadith be bad?
No, I think we already discussed it,
Yeah.
right? And see, their argument is weak or fabricated, but we already told you that this is coming from the most Sahih book. Basically, this
Yeah.
I
Well,
mean,
I think how they
Bukhari
do
is
it,
considered to be only next to, yeah. Sorry.
yeah, I think how they do it is the way I kind of outlined before, which is anything that contradicts. So it's a general principle of interpretation. Anything that contradicts the Quran will be considered to be a fabrication, right?
Yeah,
That's
there,
the
there are
first.
two ways. The one that you're
Yeah.
saying is one
Mhm.
of the ways,
Mhm.
and for that they give some kind of argument, some verse which says no, you can't marry. And this is the Surah Nisa, verse 6 that I pointed out, with the orphans. That is the one that usually they bring in, right? And the
Mhm.
second one is, they usually, what they do is, even they start going into the isnad within Sahih Bukhari and point to one of the narrators, right?
Mhm.
And they say, no, this narrator is not really trusted by a large chunk of the scholars, right? And that's why this hadith doesn't make sense, and this is you can't trust it completely. This is not Sahih, right? So those are two main chief or two chief
Yes.
arguments basically against saying that this hadith is bad, or a fabricate or mauzu or right, whatever it is, right?
Mhm. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, so let's kind of now then let the conflict between whether she was nine or not, and whether the hadiths are sound or not, rest for a minute, because we think there's no reason to think the hadiths are unsound any more than any other hadith, right?
Right.
And being secular atheist people anyway, we don't think we necessarily trust the historical methods of the hadith collection processes anyway, right? The point
Mm.
is, it doesn't really matter to me and Philo whether or not it's that particular interpretation that Aisha was nine and Muhammad married Aisha and the Quran allows child marriage is the best historical understanding of things. It doesn't matter, because we're challenging a particular religion, and religions don't necessarily, for it to be correct in terms of a religious thing, it doesn't. We don't really care whether the history is correct. We just care whether or not, assuming the history was like this, um, is it ethical? Because that's the kind of the main reason why we started doing this stream, right? Can a Muslim still accept, as people like Hijab and people like Haqiqatjou, the most popular ones today, I think, on the online spheres, who peddle this idea that Muhammad married somebody who was a minor, considered to be a minor by today's standards. Is this, can this be defensible? Is this a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Or is this something? Is it a divinely sanctioned marriage? Is morality and ethics such that, but because by virtue of a divine command, they made it so that it's become moral? Is it defensible from an Islamic light? And what sort of challenges can be raised to their point of view, right? So they may make the argument that, for example, yes, child marriage is permissible. You can marry a child, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? And one thing they could potentially say, and this is from the kind of list of objections that we kind of made, is um, uh, childhood is subjective, or childhood is something that changes and differs from country to country, state to state, society to society. And they may argue, for example, now I'm not saying this is something that Hijab and Haqiqatjou makes the argument for. So this is assuming child marriage is there, and then they'll make the argument that, look, in France, the age of consent is 13 or something. I'm not sure whether that's true, by the way, yet. Still, there was some point. 100 years ago, 100 years ago, people married when they were like 12 years old, 11 years old. King Edward or Joseph married somebody when she was 12 or something like that. In the Bible, in America, in certain areas of the certain states in the United States, you can marry with your parental consent if you're under the age of 18 or 21 or whatever, right? And this kind of,
Yeah, I mean, sorry, just to
no, I'm
stress.
the main meat of what I want to say. I think it's evident and
Mm.
clear to everyone who's listening, who's heard it before, right? Who defines what is childhood, and are we just being subjective with this notion of childhood? When different countries, different societies, different cultures have had a different understanding of what marriage entails, and children got married historically, and so on. Are we just do we have any strong arguments to define properly childhood? And how can we say Muhammad's practice was wrong when just around the corner on this globe today there are legal systems that allow child marriage that are part of the Western Hemisphere? So let's tackle that. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Okay, Philo, do you want to? I don't want to. Do you want to go?
No. So one of the things is that, do you think it is incorrect in that sense, basically because every tradition was doing it, so that makes it wrong, right? So
Yeah,
before
exactly.
before before delving into that, I just want to take a step back and come to this question of uh, the very fundamental question here from a religious perspective. Would you consider something to be wrong because there are certain inherent issues with it? Maybe you think that it is wrong. What is your basis of thinking it is wrong, right? From from different perspectives it could be different, right? And somebody could say whether it's absolutely wrong. Somebody would say it's objectively wrong. Somebody would say it's subjectively wrong, maybe, right? And from an Islamic perspective, you're thinking that would it be right, would it be wrong to do something because God says no, and if God permits it, would it become right? So that's one of the questions. So let's for the sake of argument, uh, say that Surah 65 verse 4 permits it, right? And there are no conditions about it. There are absolutely no conditions about it. You can marry anybody of any age, whatever age the male may have, whatever age the female may have. If it is a God's edict, would that become right then? Would you then bring in all these other uh, preconditions that no, they have to be age of consent, they have to be physically mature, they have to be, their parents have to consent, and all those things? Would that come into picture or not? So my question is a little bit more towards uh, what's your moral standard is or guide is basically in these circumstances, right? And if you are Muslim, more
So,
often
so,
than not,
my,
you'll have to.
so the Muslims question. So this is where it gets interesting, because I will try and devil's advocate the points so I can
Mhm.
represent them properly. So in this sort of line of argument, accepting, remember, we're accepting the premise that there is, on the assumption that there is child marriage and Muhammad married a child. All right. The objection to people who critique it vehemently that this was wrong. The counter argument to that is, look, there's many societies today, areas of the globe, areas of the world where the legal age of marriage is very similarly young, right? And in fact, different countries define the ability to have sex at different ages, the ability to marry at different ages, right? Doesn't this render the concept of marital age, this not this kind of objectively, scientifically objective fact, right, or something like that? That's kind of what they want to say. It's not a concrete fact. It's in fact relative from society to society. So how can you, or how can we, condemn or think or blame a culture that had their own definition of childhood, their own definition of marriage, their own definition of sexual capacity to consent, right? When different cultures are coming up with this at different ages. Now, I have an answer for this. That I don't find this the least bit compelling, because I have a very strong answer for this. But I want to, before we talk about divine command theory mainly, right? What would you, how would you deal with that? And yeah.
Yeah, I know. In my opinion, this is. I'll still go with the harm principle. Basically, I would say if somebody has there are quite a few things, quite a few objections that you can raise to that argument or against that argument. Basically, one of the reasons is the harm principle. Are you harming somebody in terms of not only physically, but are you harming them in terms of their mental health as well? And there have been studies about it, right? Anybody who gets married at earlier age, they get into certain mental issues, basically, right? Especially especially without them knowing what they're getting into. So that is one of the things, basically. I think that's one of my strongest arguments against it, right? And then I would think that it's still, if you whether you think it's subjective opinion, I think it's not a subjective opinion. It's an objective opinion that
Mhm.
suffering, that harm, or that
Yeah.
feeling of
Yeah.
mental trauma is an objective fact. It's not a subjective fact. So that's
Yeah.
my argument against it,
So
pretty much.
what would you say? I'm going to object to it as well, but what would you say to people who say, but look, in Kansas, I'm making this up, by the way, so if I misrepresent American legal system right now, it's because I don't remember it. But certain areas of Southern America, where, with the permission of the parents, you can get married at a very young age. And if that had been, for example, the UK soil, that would be illegal. Isn't there something subjective about that people are adjudicating or judging people's criminality based on differing legal systems here. Who's the right one here? If it's relative to the country, the geography where you're born, like in America, in that particular state, it will be perfectly legal to marry a very young child. Whereas if you marry a same child in the UK, you'll be in jail for a very long time, right? So
totally. No, in my eyes, that legal system is wrong. I think they have risen up from where they were earlier, but they haven't crossed that, because as you rightly said, so that in 27 states among whatever 50 states that United States has, there is no legal age for, there is no age limit for marrying, right? And that's something that I don't stand by. I don't think that is a right statute, basically. But
that's right. Absolutely. No, I fully agree with you. So let me bolster your point then. So what I would say to that same argument that I was making is that the mere fact that cultures, societies, historical periods of time has seen differing ages of marriage is no different to the mere fact that different cultures, different societies, so different rules on slavery, different ages of which regulations on slavery, different rules on employment rights. Society is filled with various different cultures treating things in different format. That doesn't, to relative to the time, relative to the circumstance, but we still hold universal, objectively moral binding principles that we've recognized today after moral reflection, legal reflection, and understanding, that would eventually we come to the recognition that these things were wrong. So the mere fact that history is littered with slavery, and different cultures and societies practice slavery, and some places in the world today is practice slavery, is no argument to the relativism when it comes to in favor of the relativism for slavery. Slavery is not relatively morally wrong. We still think it's objectively morally wrong, right? We think it's objectively morally wrong, and in the same sense, the mere fact that we have different countries today with different ages of consent, different ages for marriage, different permissions on marriage, doesn't necessarily mean we think those countries are good either in their systems and their understandings. But how do we ground that principle? Am I just making it up? Am I just asserted it out of nowhere? That it's very easy to pretend to be an objectivist, right? Very easy to go, oh, all these countries got it wrong. I'm the most wisest moral person here, right? No, I can actually ground this, right? And how do I ground this, right? I will ground this by neuroscience. I will ground this by advancements in cognitive science. I will ground this based on
empathy as well.
Empathy, obviously. Empathy. When you add those things together, for example, let me give you an example. Right, the legal academic Jennifer Droback, right. She's done various studies, and collected various studies from scientists as well, right. Neuroscientists and so on, actually being able to use science to delineate between childhood and adulthood, using science to be able to delineate between adulthood and childhood, right? You can, in fact, make the demarcation, right? In fact, to some extent, it doesn't matter what we call a child or what we call an adult. What matters is, because that's just a point of semantics, right? What matters is whether something is harmful or not, as he put it there. If we were empathic, would it cause harm, right? And you can actually come to the conclusion that certain ages with certain levels of neurological, cognitive, and psychological maturity, right, and that you are better able to navigate the world, apprehend circumstances that are dangerous, to be able to outthink somebody else in terms of their deceptive motivations or potential exploitation they may subject you to, detect lies in others, right? To foreplan, prospectively plan. Again, you need your frontal cortex development to be able to engage in determined and thorough, detailed thinking about the future, right? And being able to also have the emotional intelligence to be able to, again, detect behaviors, motivations, hidden motivations in others, right? To be able to defend yourself. And those two things are actually a product of your neurological development. It actually occurs at a particular brain development. And that brain development is not subjective, is entirely a biological objective process, right? And it typically occurs, at later mid to late teen stages. Arguably, real sophistication comes even later. But so Jennifer Drobak does several studies to actually argue that in the United States of America, and not just merely the United States of America, it is applicable to the rest of the world, right? The age of consent for sexual relationships, forget marriage. Marriage is a consequence of this anyway. It affects marriage as well because of the reasons I'm going to outline. But just for consent, right, should be raised higher. Should be raised higher to what it is now, even at the most highest states where the age of marriage is sexual relations is even at the highest. It should be even raised even higher, given our cognitive capacities are far more vulnerable, unable to discern good from bad, unable to discern the motives of the people, and the impact that it can have when you have those sort of relations, right?
Madin, sorry, finish your thought, please.
No, I'm pretty much done. Go on, carry on.
So what happens now? Let me wear the skull cap now for a bit. So what if people said that there was no choice for people back then because there were almost wars everywhere? Everybody was, pretty much part of a warrior class or a warrior clan or a tribe. And then due to whatever reasons, due to the environmental or lack of hygiene, lack of medicine and all those issues, the lifespan that people had didn't allow them to wait until much later to have build their families, because otherwise they would die, and then the population will start dipping, right, instead of growing, right? And that's a disaster. That's against the the whole thing that people are there to procreate and increase the population. It'll just die out, right? Finish. So that's why they were allowing early child marriages, basically, because so they could prepare, whatever that 2.0 growth rate, right?
Yeah.
Stays alive or over then.
Before I answer that question, let me also say that alongside cognitive maturity, also physiological and biological maturity, right? Somebody under the age of 9 or 8 doesn't have the hip structure, doesn't have the structure, doesn't have the nutritional capacities or capabilities to be, it's a high risk issue. But this relates to this point as well, the point that you just made. So this is why we can indeed define childhood and define it quite universally, right? Universally. And this is not merely the byproduct of studies conducted today on today's children, right? Not merely at all, because the evidence of frontal cortex development, right, back even not just 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, not just even 10,000 years ago, even back possibly 20 to 30,000 years ago, suggests that there is a correlation between skull size and these anatomical features in the brain, right? And therefore, it's highly unlikely that even a 12-year-old child back in back 20,000 years ago wouldn't have the ability to understand many things. They would be childlike, youth-like. This is why they may be prone to making rash judgments, trusting people who adults won't trust, right? Not being able to predict the world future properly, right? And enter into contracts that are exploitative, right? Jennifer Drobak therefore makes the point that the age of consent should be increased. And in fact, these people shouldn't be able to enter into very, very significant contracts until a much later age, right? And there's no reason for us to think that this physiological objective thing that I'm talking about neurology changes 10,000 years ago, let alone 2,000 years ago, right? And there is some arguments some people might make that there's accelerated evolutionary development that may have happened due to ecological pressures those are also not correct. And
that's also a bunk argument, by the way. Okay, now let me.
Yeah, but do you want me to address that point, or sorry, do you want to say something again? Sorry. Philo, are you there? Hello? I'm not sure if Philo is able to hear me, or are you still there? So I know Philo you've said that Waqas, you're invited to the stream, but I have to kindly think that I think we've stopped you from coming on to English streams precisely because there's terrible communication issues between us. So I'm not sure I am in agreement with Philo there that Waqas should.
Okay, I'm back. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes.
Okay, my internet just died, so I had to reconnect from using a different network. Anyways, I think I couldn't hear what your points were later on, but I had a response.
Okay.
So go ahead.
Yeah. No. So your point, your argument, which many Muslims raise, is the idea that in order to have a sufficiently large population, in order to breed, in order to overcome the high loss of life, high infant mortality rates, let's say, in order to have an expanding empire, in order to have population growth, we need to marry earlier. So this is not, therefore, it's not merely an
excuse, an alibi.
It's not an excuse. It's not an excuse. There's a moral reason behind it, but it also is not. It's not moral subjectivism or moral relativism, because some people can make the argument that something that was correct in the 7th century, isn't correct any longer in the 21st century, and then that sounds a bit weird, right? Because if something is absolutely wrong, of all times and circumstances and places, like killing an innocent person is wrong, morally wrong, is objectively wrong. I can't just go kill an innocent person. That wouldn't suddenly become right in the 7th century, because it's the 7th century. Yeah, go on.
Sorry, I think I have a flaky internet today. Really flaky internet. Anyway, so I was saying this is definitely I see your point there. Somebody can come.
Yeah. Hello.
Go ahead. You want to say something? Is there a lag? It seems like there is a lag from my side.
There might be on your part. Yeah, I'm not hearing a lag, but there might your speech seems a little bit unsure of itself, so it indicates to me that you might be having problems. Yeah.
No. I connected with another internet. My original internet just died, and I think it seems like the secondary one is not helping me either. So, anyways, the point I wanted to make here was, Martin, that I mean, I agree that defense doesn't really work. But then somebody, why are you looking at physiological features like hip structure for procreation, for giving birth and all that thing? You could just use what is it called, that there is a surgery to what is it called?
Cesarean.
What is that surgery called for non-conventional births? Can you
cesarean.
Hear me, Madhan?
I can hear you. It's called a cesarean.
Seems like I've lost any connection. Madhan, can you hear me?
I can hear you. I don't know. Do you want to come back into the stream? So apologies.
Yeah,
apologies to
all.
It's just
apologies everybody. I think it's my internet is troubling me today. I'll drop out and come back.
Okay. So whilst Philo returns, the show needs to continue. So I think what he's referring to is cesarean C-section, and I mean that would
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. Yes.
Yeah, the C-section is what I was talking about. And I just kept getting at circumcision, circumcision. I don't know. For a minute, I just couldn't get that word. But anyway, so the point I was trying to make, Madin, was that, let's say your argument was that not only the mental aspects of a child are developed, but also the hip structure and expanded to whatever is considered to be ready um, for childbirth, right? So I would suggest let's go for C-section, right?
Yeah, sorry. Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, if there's ever a situation where children are able to give birth in a way that adults can, then it would diffuse the. Of course, it will diffuse the biological issue. It'll diffuse the practical issues. But that would be much more than just a C-section, right? It would be more to do with nutrition. It would be more to do with whether or not a child's physical development is such that they can carry the child from 1 to 9 months. Whether so there's so many other things that it leads to several sorts of nutritional deficiencies. It accelerates the chances of many forms of developmental problems, right? And that's just physiologically, let alone mentally. So that's that alone. But assuming that we have all of these other technologies to be able to neutralize all of that, yeah, suppose that in 200 years from now, 300 years from now, the child's biological handicaps that prevent a child to be a parent is overcome in all sorts of ways: body weight, nutrition, yeah, musculoskeletal structure, and yes, a C-section being readily available without too much intrusiveness. Would it then render it permissible, or would it then be fine? Well, then you still need to continue to be able to solve the mental problem, right? The mental faculty aspect, the informed consent aspect, right? But if you even let go of that and say, what if we can turn children minds into sophisticated adult minds? A 5-year-old is not just biologically just like a 35-year-old woman. Well, let's say not that. 28-year-old woman, and biologically and mentally a 28-year-old woman. Would it then be okay? At that point, you've just gotten rid of the concept of what we mean by child or minor. In which case, you've transformed everything physically to a different kind of reality. And in which case, it would.
I think at that point you have just all those things that you have struggled for in calling a child, what makes a child as a child, you have just got rid of those things basically, and then you're saying, now what, can you do it? And I think the mental image at that point, then you're trying to make it, is still wrong. But then I think when you have put all those conditions, I think what you're saying is, can a 28-year-old with good mental faculties and good physiological traits marry? And the answer would be yes, absolutely. Why not?
Yeah. So
Right?
let's just repeat that again. If a 9-year-old was exactly like a 28-year-old, then we're living in an alternative fictional fantasy reality where children don't exist in the same way they exist.
Exactly.
So it's like saying, what if when we kill somebody they didn't die? Well, it won't be the same, right?
Exactly.
If I stabbed you in your neck and you just for two seconds evaporated, and then you somehow what's the word that you use in video games when you come back? In video games, what is it called?
So sorry, Madhan, I couldn't hear you for a second. Can you repeat that? What video
Yeah,
game?
what is the word in a video game? So the audience can help me here. What is the word in a video game when you load back into the video game screen?
Your life is you got your life back or something like that? Maybe, I don't know.
No,
I
no,
don't play video games. Resurrection?
not resurrection.
Avatar?
No, it's there's a particular word in a video game. I forgot now. What I don't I can't remember. So people who play Call of Duty, people who play shoot 'em ups, they know what I mean. You get shot and you die, and then you just reload back into the game. It would be a far more trivial harm, right? I'm not saying it's not wrong, but it'll be more like a minor assault, right? Particularly if you can continue from the exact same place where you were, right? If I went and when I stabbed Philo in the neck, and he disappeared, and then he just summoned back into existence. Oh, I forgot what it's called now. What is it? Is it re-swamp or spawned? Spawned. That's the word. Sorry, spawned.
Yeah, respawn.
Respawn. That's it. Respawn. So if you
Respawning.
respawn back, then it's like a mild assault.
Yeah.
Especially if you don't feel pain. If stabbing you in the neck doesn't have any pain, and you respawn 2 seconds later, then what is it like? Then it's like trying to push somebody. Well, like, let's say if somebody's walking down the concrete. So in this world, if somebody's walking down the street now, and I push somebody, and somewhat deter them by 2 seconds from moving to their destination, well, it's a mild nuisance. It's bad. I did something bad, of course. I assaulted them, and it's not right. But I did not do anything to the level of a murder, right? I did not put them in significant pain when I stabbed them in the neck, and I did not deprive them of life. And if those two factors weren't there, then murder won't have the same nature as what we call it. We won't call it murder. Murder doesn't exist in that world, right? Murder does not exist in the way we mean it. And in the same sense,
right.
If children were such that they were biologically, physiologically, mentally completely identical to 28-year-olds, 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds, then it won't be the notion of children. It doesn't exist anymore. But that's not a very, first of all, that's unrealistic. That's not what's happened historically. That's not the real world. And therefore, it's just a thought experiment. But yeah.
Right. So, Madin, they make another argument for this marriage, basically. And that's the argument is that there are certain regions on the planet Earth where,
before you proceed, we didn't tackle the point of reproduction. That they needed to have replacement fertility rates.
Yeah. Please go ahead. Yeah, please.
Because you raised that and we didn't tackle it. So to that, what I would say is, first of all, anybody who's listening, please give me a source, give me a prevailing historical anthropological view showing that in the 7th century, during the time of antiquity, at that time where Islam was at its inception, that the average life expectancy was such that it required people to marry children, what we consider children and minors today. Please substantiate this point, right? Because far as I can see, far as what I've known and what I've researched, the average age was around 35, maybe 40. That's the most common view, right? And that was heavily skewed by infant mortality rates, right? So that average itself was calculated. I'm not 100% sure exactly from what sources, but people have calculated that and have critiqued it themselves, that the limitations of it is that it only is coming to that average due to the fact that it's a survivor effect. Of those people who survived, right, there was a lot
versus
more people.
Those who died. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I do agree with it. And then I'll give you a few examples for that, and then we'll move on.
Before you complete, let me just finish the point. People who did continue to, who survived the beginning days of infanthood, people who survived past the age of 10, historians say this as well, of that time period, they generally could live beyond the age of 35. Yeah, they generally could, right? So
moving on, Madan.
So I want to say that the average is calculated through a mean of dividing all the people and making a generalization and then calculating the mean of the aggregate, and they come to 35 or something like that, because of birth and death rates. Meaning, when you have a lot of people dying before that, there's a survivor effect, and you work out the average from that. But people who did continue to live, they aged known to have lived till 60 and so on.
Too much longer. Yeah. I mean, Prophet Muhammad himself died at 62, 63. Ayesha herself lived up to something like at least 70s or 80s. There was a Jewish guy who lived up to 90, Abu Afaq. And so there are examples of people, who live.
Yeah, well, I
So
don't want people.
only the mortality rate lowered down because of the infant mortality rate. There were a lot more children dying at that time under the age of 10 or so. And then there were wars all around, and that's why
Exactly.
the mortality rate was low as well. But there were societies which were very peaceful, and they were so.
Yes.
This general edict should not have been applied for those who were peaceful societies. For them, there is no such wars going on, and
So
then
the
the
question, yeah,
infant
Philo.
mortality.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you again, but so the question shouldn't be what was the average age of people then. The question should be what would be the average age of people had they not died early due to diseases and illnesses, right? And what was the average age past maybe age 10 or something, let's say, that people died after reaching age 10 or something like that. Yeah, because when you have birth and death rates, mortality rates, infant mortality rates affecting the skewing the statistics, the average will come down. In order to do a proper, more accurate mathematical calculation of real life expectancy, take out them from the facts and figures, leave them at bay, so it doesn't affect the average, and then work out the mean, and that will give you
Yeah,
higher
I mean,
rates.
in short, the infant mortality rate is, or the lower lifespan is not a good metric in this case because it omits a lot of information from from consideration, basically, right?
Yes, yes,
All right,
yes.
next point. So next point they usually make is that there are regions on planet Earth where people especially living in the hotter environments or the warmer locales of the Earth mature faster. And so, what is your take on that?
Yeah, so there's no
Or
scientific
maybe,
evidence.
yeah, and
There's
on those who are living in the colder sides of the Earth or
yeah,
planet, they mature slower, right? So
yeah. There's
for
no
them,
scientific evidence.
age of maturity is 14, 15, while those in the warmer environments, the age of maturity is probably 8, 9, or something like that.
Yeah, there's no scientific evidence for that, even just restricted or limited to puberty, right? Even just restricted or limited to puberty, I don't think there's any sort of scientific evidence for that. I would like somebody to produce. Again, we would like to see peer-reviewed consensus. We don't want dissenting judgments. We don't want one tiny source here or there. We don't want some discredited scientific meanderings, speculations, or conjectures in some dried up journal or article publication that nobody lends any credence to. Give me some real scientific authorities about that, because there isn't any, right? Just restricted and limited to puberty. If you look at the puberty rates around African continents right now, in the African continent, it's not as low as 7, 8,
9 years
9.
or 7 years,
Yeah,
6
it's not
years,
like
right?
that.
Right. Totally,
Exactly. So I'm
totally.
not sure where you're getting this. If you want to say that back in the day it was like that, you're inventing pseudoscience, right? We've got no reason to think that. Maybe it was, but no, we don't think so. There's no reason to think that at all. And that's ignoring neurological development. It's ignoring musculoskeletal development. What are the ideal ages for birth and so on. Yeah, are you saying hot climates makes your bones stronger, body larger, boobs bigger, your hips more
Yeah.
sculpt?
No. I think this is just a trickery in my eyes as well.
Where does it
So
come from?
I'm wearing the skull cap, and then I have to come out
No,
of
no, I'm
it.
not saying
By the
you
way,
are. I'm not saying you're saying this. I know you're
no, no,
echoing the
no.
voice.
I agree. I see. I mean, I'm not saying that you are saying that about me, but then this is just for audience, right? I'm just
Yeah,
saying that.
yeah.
Okay.
Because
The next, yeah,
because no, because like I said in my first point, neurological studies show that actual physical apparatus of the brain is missing in children, right? And there's no reason to think that 10,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago, that people of an age 9, autobiographical age of 9, archaeological age of 9, right, were capable of thinking like a 21-year-old, because they didn't have the cortex, right? The skull development was nowhere near to be there to have the cortex. Yeah, that is a
Yeah, Madan. But this is about the climate rather than the time, period.
Yes, exactly. So that's what I'm saying. Is this dependent upon the temperature of the region?
The temperature, the
Yeah,
climate, the warmer climates produced,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So yeah, I would like anybody to produce some evidence showing that warm climates leads to accelerated neurological development, such that not
Neurological and physiological, right? Both.
yes, yes,
Right,
and
right,
there
right,
isn't.
right.
They can't even get it for puberty, let alone all of the things that I've said. So no, there's no evidence for this.
Yeah. So then somebody could just say, no, but this marriage was divinely ordained. And if it's divinely ordained, who are you to say it's good or bad?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
what is your argument against that? I mean, I do have a response to that. I'm pretty sure you have the same response as well,
Yeah,
right?
sure, of course. Yeah. So, I mean, when you make these sort of arguments that is divinely ordained, unless so, unless you take a view where you think God can just dictate anything and make it moral, then you so it's most Muslims, most thoughtful Muslims at least, they think God is benevolent, just, merciful. And this is just another example of the problem of evil. This is why I think all subtopics within scripture where moral issues or dilemmas are highlighted, like the child marriage or slavery, let's say, is a subset of the problem of evil. And everything that we've already discussed about this problem of evil and all the arguments related to problem of evil applies here as well. So there's nothing new I'm going to be saying here that people haven't heard,
Yeah,
right?
and as we love bringing Euthyphro's dilemma, I think this is a good point to bring in here. Basically, this is the same thing. Is something is good because God says so, or God allows it, or is something good that's why God allows it, basically, right? And this is the case you can think here pretty much in the sense that if you believe in divine command theory for here, or because it's a divine command that uh, Hazrat Muhammad should marry Hazrat Ayesha, right, at certain age, that's why it's good. Then whatever God commands would become good. Maybe killing would become good. Maybe marrying a baby 2 months old would become good, or whatever, right? It's just like arbitrary. You can't just say this is bad or this is good. Now you don't have any claim to any what you call your senses or your reasoning. You can't reason into anything that even intuitively appears bad to you, right? Because it's a command, divine command, and you believe in it. So that's one of the problems I see over here in this one, right? And that's why I said, I think in generally in our discussions, Euthyphros has to come in to picture,
Yeah.
one time
No, I
or
mean,
the other.
it is like a youthful problem, but it's also like it's a general problem of evil and divine skeptical theism as well. It's a combination of those, right?
Yeah, yeah,
It is
it's skeptical theism as well, right?
yeah.
I agree totally.
Reason being, somebody can accept that, for example, God is not arbitrary. Somebody can accept and bite the bullet of Euthyphro and say that God is some sort of being who obeys the dictates of benevolence, let's say, and they may not want to accept it fully and wholeheartedly because it kind of renders morality independent of God. But they may go down that route and say that God is benevolent, and these have real solid meanings, right? God can't just poison a child. God can't just command forcing yourself upon a woman. God can't simply just do bad things. He has to do good things. But what they may say that the child marriage of Muhammad, what he engaged in, and the permissibility of child marriage from the Quran is a good thing, and we just can't see it. That it is consistent with his mercy, with his justness, with his compassion, with his benevolence. It is consistent with it. We just don't know how, right? We're like a child who is going to a doctor, and the doctor prescribes us some medicine or an injection, and we think, what an evil doctor. You're stabbing me with this, you're stabbing me with this needle into my arm. You're hurting me for no reason. But the doctor knows that he's doing it for a good reason, right? He's trying to prevent you from getting polio, right? And without that medication, you may get polio, right? And it's necessary that you take it. And you wouldn't know that as a child because you're limited in your faculties, and it's consistent with the doctor's benevolence and moral duty, right? His maxim of being a duty-bound moral doctor, Hippocratic oath, if you want to call it, right? And the same applies to God. God is benevolent, and there's something mysteriously good about child marriage that we just can't see, right? It might look exploitative. It might look like the child has never had a choice. Might look like the child was thrown into a situation in a sexual relationship with somebody who is much more capable, understanding, to take advantage of her in a way that she can't resist. All these things look harmful, right? They look very harmful, but from the point of view of our senses, they look harmful, but they actually are, from a divine point of view, moral. That is the stronger version of it. And I think that's just typical divine, skeptical theism, right? And everything that I've said about skeptical theism, the problems with it applies here, right? One, the idea that there's some mysterious good, that depends entirely on faith. You just believe that. Yeah. Equally, there could be a mysterious evil, right? And we're looking at it, right? So that's the first point. The second point is that we don't judge by what's possible or mysterious possibilities. We judge by what's apparent right now, right? The only reason that we know about the doctor being good is because we know that, or now, but there's no reason.
We have the background information about why
Exactly.
a vaccine helps somebody, right? So you
If
just
we were
can't
all
give
at the state of
those kind of analogies, right? Pretty much, yeah.
If we were all in the state of the child and there was no separate independent background information about doctors being good people, it would be a reasonable suspicion.
For a child, it would be perfectly within his or her own right to think that the doctor is evil, pretty much, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Totally. Exactly. And furthermore, we judge things based on the present and using inductive evidence. Otherwise, we have to get rid of all forms of induction, right? For example, if a psychopathic murderer goes and kills somebody, he can also appeal to the fact that there might be some sort of mysterious, mystical future reason that we've not apprehended yet that would set him free as an innocent person, or he may have had some justification to justify his alleged criminality. What looks like a crime now might not be a crime tomorrow, right? We may gather some evidence and release him from prison because he must have had that justification. But right now we don't have that, and that won't work for the criminal. So why should it work for this being that's allegedly saying that this is actually a good thing, consistent with his mercy? We judge things based on the most current evidence. The most current evidence, doesn't support a merciful being, and is not consistent with his mercy, because we see issues with child marriage all around the world. Right now in the world, in several continents, we see the issues, right? And I would argue that based on neurological information that we have from anybody who's listening to this, look at the legal scholar Jennifer Drobak and her information on the link between neurology and childhood naivety, vulnerabilities, etc. It's a real phenomenon. It's a real category. Childhood is a real category, despite the fact that historically different cultures define childhood differently. Just like Muslims won't accept the fact that historically different cultures defined men and women differently, that there was a third gender. Muslims don't accept that, right? So why should we defer to the narrative that cultures define things differently? They don't accept the objectivity of different cultures. Native Americans, for example, thinking that there was three genders, right? There wasn't just two genders, there was three genders. But Muslims believe, objectively speaking, there's only two genders, right? So the mere fact that cultures can have various interpretations of gender doesn't falsify objective gender for Muslims. Similarly, the mere fact that age and childhood has been, I agree, I acknowledge completely, littered throughout human history, been defined differently, by measured by different things. Rites of passage, whether you can pick up a tree and fight, whether you can drink water from the well, doesn't mean those were good understandings of childhood for the time. It wasn't. Those may have been the primitive understandings. And I agree, if you look through an anthropological book, a book of anthropology or books of anthropology, you'll find various cultures defining childhood at different ages. But we can come up now, thanks to modern science, concrete definitions of childhood that applies not just today, but would have all applied to pre-modern societies as well. It's just that those cultures did get it wrong, and we can say that objectively, right? Sometimes it may have been through necessity. Like if you're born, even right now in the world, if you're born in a village of Bangladesh, my home country, and your parents you're in a really, really poor place, it might just be a practical necessity for a 4-year-old child to work, right? So sometimes it might be, although detrimental to that child's development, the best possibility to survive, right? But even that, we can't extrapolate to 7th century Islamic, during the Islamic inception, because the closest thing to that necessity argument was the birth rate, trying to keep the birth rates high enough, right? But as we debunked that already, that there was no reason, sound good reason to think that the birth rate was so bad, or that mortality rates were so high, or the average age was so low that 1-year-old, 2-year-old, 3-year-old, 6-year-olds should be getting married, right? You could still get married at 15, right, and still have children, because people still aged. You know, even if you take the statistic that 35 was the average life expectancy, which I don't think is a true reflection of it, because it's skewed by what we talked about before, death rates. Yeah, but even if we take that, that's sufficient time if you get married at 15 to have children. Can you have more children when you're 5 years old? No. And that's the point that I forgot to mention before. If you wanted to have high levels of fertility, you wouldn't be getting married at 5 years old, at 6 years old, at 7 years old, at 8 years old, because there's no science suggesting that it increases the chances for healthy births. In fact, it suggests that even then it would have increased the chances of unhealthy birth and higher rates of mortality. Can you see that? Can you see?
Exactly.
Right?
I think that's something that people didn't stumble on, this thought or this practical aspect of reproduction, basically, or carrying forward your genes in the most efficient way. I think they still struggled, and it was probably, you can say, to give them the benefit of the doubt, you can say that period was and that's why you can say you can't blame them, and that period was a phase of trial and error. Probably they didn't really understand as to what would make the best out of the reproductive system, so that their generations can carry on uh, with much lesser effort, with much lesser um, destruction, or failures, rather, is the word that I wanted to use, right? So a much better structure would have been, or much better reproductive success would have been, if they had children at the age of 16, let's say,
Yes.
instead of in 13 or 12. They would have had much
There's a
success
big
rate, and then they
difference.
would have
There's a massive
seen the
difference.
societies as they
Yeah.
progress. They must have realized that no, it makes sense to have children after
Yeah.
16
And
or
there's a
17,
massive
or
difference
maybe even
between
20. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a massive difference between a 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old and a 12, 13-year-old,
Yeah,
right? And
totally,
it's not
totally.
merely
And
and it's not merely a modern day phenomena thing where people are having delayed adolescence. There's another argument saying that like today's adolescents are more childish than what people were like before. I think people before were forced into adulthood type roles, but actually, like I said, the neuroscience suggests, combined with evolutionary biology and skull development and biological development, that no, actually children even 100 years ago were childlike. they were just thrown into mature roles, and therefore, as a result, were forced to be mature. And therefore, yes, to some extent, they may have learned to be a bit more mature than some people, but they still had the brain deficiencies that were there. They did,
Yeah, I mean,
right?
their IQs would have remained the same, but that's
Yeah.
just that they were forced into
Yeah.
thinking some things that probably their brains were not supposed to, not
Yes.
prepared to, not supposed, not rather, I'm saying supposed to, were not prepared to think through those things, right? So
Exactly.
yeah, I think Madan, we have covered almost all the objections. We are touching to our mark. I think we should sign off for today, and maybe come back to it.
Possibly,
This
yeah.
is a good
I think
topic. I think
there is
I think we didn't get the sorry.
sorry, go on. There is another objection that I think Daniel
Yeah,
Haqiqatjou made,
there are
which is
quite a few objections. I'm not raising them because just we should just close today. Quite a
okay.
few objections we didn't cover, right? And what
Yes.
I'm thinking is maybe we can have Khayali with us. We'll do the same stream again later on at some point. Uh, take up those challenges which we didn't cover, and then also maybe even go onto the scriptural side a little bit more, which we couldn't do because we didn't have Khayali in the stream, right? I think he's the one who can just within a snap of fingers, he can just bring about any hadith or a verse into picture, right, on the screen. So maybe we can do that later on at some point. And maybe
Yeah.
one more thing is I think we didn't have good enough audience. Maybe I'm not quite sure what lagged basically. Maybe we didn't have a thumbnail for much longer. I think we should have a little bit more of an audience, live audience for this topic. I think in that case, I think
Hmm.
we'll enjoy it a
Can I
little bit
just say
more.
something as a closing remark then? I just want to make a very, very tiny 2-minute case for um, against child marriage very quickly.
Hmm.
Um,
Sure.
even even if you kind of ignore the biological aspects and just think about it from a cognitive point of view, why is it wrong, for example, for a child to get into a marriage or even into sexual relations, right? And you can solidly make this objective by referring to our biology entirely, namely female children, but applicable to both female and male children, right? And henceforth, it's not an artifact. It's not an artifact of social construction. It's not an artifact of societal, a relative societal principle where we just arbitrarily dictated that it's wrong for children to marry, right? Because deeply rooted in our biology is sexual selection. Every human being, deeply rooted in our biology, has the ability to be able to choose to reproduce with people that we deemed fit, right? Particularly for females. This is why females are very selective, right? They don't want to wrongly get impregnated by a incompetent male, a dysfunctional male, a male who will harm them, a dangerous male, right? Hence why females are very picky. People who have been in the dating networks, or people who are familiar with what I'm talking about, they know this very well. Women, rightly so, I would say, are very selective who they reproduce with. So why would it be bad then for a female child, to get married without her consent? Because of that, right? Because you're bypassing a natural biological mechanism of selection that is so fundamental to procreation and so important to women before the age of understanding, when she's very young. You're disarming the female from that natural selective choice. This argument transcends culture because it's common to our
No, but then Madan, then someone can say, no, I don't believe in that natural selection as a mechanism, right?
I
I
mean,
mean,
somebody
it's
can say
apparent.
anything.
It's so.
Yeah, somebody can say something to somebody, anything. But this is, somebody can say, for example,
Red is
When I say,
yellow.
yeah, I mean, come on. At some point, you have to just get with the reality, right?
Yeah, no,
Um,
no, I totally understand. I'm saying from Muslim. Whenever I see these things, I'm wearing a skull cap, basically. But
yeah, but
yeah, I mean, I see your point. I see your point,
you don't
and
you don't have to necessarily bake it into evolution. Yeah, even if you don't believe in evolution, even if you believe that you were created in one go, right? That's natural selectivity is well documented. Natural selectivity, sexual exclusivity, or sexual prowess to be able to decide your sexual suitors is a well is a strong enough principle that can float off biology, but can be securely fastened with float off evolutionary biology, but can be still securely fastened to evolution. It has
yeah,
evolutionary
no,
roots.
I agree. I agree with this.
Even if
I
you reject
totally agree with that.
evolution, yeah,
Yeah,
even if you reject evolution, this is something that is extremely
yeah.
important.
Sexual selection is apparent, right?
Yeah,
Without even evolution being the bedrock of it. You know. Yeah,
that's correct. That's correct.
yeah, yeah.
And
Okay, all right.
and
Mhm.
yeah, and I just want to say that, and that is why rape is such a horrendous crime, right? Otherwise, rape would be just like an
So
assault.
you're talking about grape, right?
Yes, I'm talking about grapes, but
Okay.
that would automatically be like an assault. But why is it
Mhm.
so much more atrocious that it was sexual in nature? What is it about sexuality that aspect? It's because that in itself is an irreducible wrong. In the same sense, we say killing somebody is wrong because it just deprives them of life. Rape is wrong because it deprives them of sexual choice, right? And why is sexual choice important? It's just because it's an artifact of our biology. It's irreducibly wrong. It just ends there. They're not. You can't keep asking why is it wrong, all the way down to the bottom. Sometimes it's going to hit an end point. Why is it wrong to slap me in my face? Because I don't like it. It hurts me. And why is it wrong for a woman, to be forced upon because they don't like it in a very special sense? It's not just like a slap in the face. It's an aggressive slap in the face, aggressive one because of a sexual nature, and it's irreducibly wrong. And I want to say, therefore, child marriages has an irreducible wrongness to it. Can Muslims say some stuff to that? Yes, they could say, for example, what if the woman's choice was facilitated by parents? What if they were facilitated by a guardian? Then it's not merely
Yeah, I think
just
then the argument still holds. Basically, you can't say the same thing. What if the parents agreed for an adult child to go through, forcibly having,
yeah,
you know, a relationship with somebody? Would that be wrong? People would say yes. Then why, in the case of child, that's not wrong? I think that
yes,
our
yeah,
argument still holds, basically. So
yeah.
anyway, yeah, I think we are at the end of time. Martin will cover it next
Yeah.
stream.
So all of these things
So
we will expand more further. Yeah, I just wanted to say end with that, but we will expand on this further to get into the nuances and the counter arguments of what I said, as a part two. Um, but
yeah, I
we'll end.
think we'll do a part two of it sometime soon, maybe later at some point. So yeah, thank you everybody for dropping by. I think we did have a very low attendance today, and that's why I think it kind of it's demotivating, to be quite frank, because low attendance is not something I would expect people to grow, and the audience base to grow. It's not growing, so we're gonna cut short our stream over here. But anyways, so thanks for dropping by. We do have a channel, Unwilling Faith, that is English only, and we haven't worked on it, to be quite frank, because there's no audience over there. There's no audience here as well. So I'm not quite sure what needs to be done. What I can ask those who are going to listen later on, or maybe those who are listening right now, to help us support this channel by any which way. Financially, if you can do, that's perfectly fine. But at least support us by liking, subscribing, sharing, and whatever you can do to spread this channel, so that we see at least some crowd over here, right? It's extremely demotivating to see single digit numbers watching your channel. So with that, thank you very much, and ciao for now, and hopefully see you in the next stream. Thanks.